everyone, and welcome to episode 506 of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Easy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mason Clark.
That's a me.
That's a you? That's you?
A me.
Yeah, that's like a Mario quote almost. I'm also joined by a man who is the Donovan Mitchell of this podcast, Abe Stein.
I totally know who Donovan Mitchell is off the top of my head, and I will take no questions on the matter.
Let's talk about always improving. It is the point of the show. We want to be talking about what we're doing all the time to just try to improve at the game. And it's so funny. So often I feel like, I'm going to go first this week, and I feel like so often, like, we take weeks off, we, like, take our breaks, and we encourage others to do the same thing. And I was not going to be able to play an RCQ this weekend. It was Star Wars Day on Saturday, which is like a holiday for me. I always celebrated and things like that. But I still wanted to contribute to my teammates and to what's going on. And so I've picked up Standard for those players that are going to Dallas, even though I decided to drop out a little bit through last season. And I'm honestly struggling. Like, Standard is usually my format. It's like usually the thing that I have the most success in, that I can go through. And there could be some reasons for that. Like, I'm not playing blue-white, which is the deck that I would typically play in this format. Like, I'm trying other things. But I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I want to talk about during Always Improving. The first thought is, like, the pressures in the format. And I think that the Jerry T podcast talked about this either last week or the week before about temporary lockdown and Path of Peril and kind of just the squeeze that those cards were putting on the format, and how the format has now moved into the position of decks like this weekend. We saw Blue-Black doing well at the RC in Canada, and we saw kind of just a very slow format. Like, coming out of last week, some of the decks that we talked about were like Gruul mid-range and how they compared to the split of the format, right? And the best performing decks all turned out to be like a little bit slower, a little bit more controlling. And then you also have decks that are like blue-white, that are these controlling decks, and they're actually pressured into their own playing of things like Tidebender Mage in the main, because it's about mana consumption, and thus you must use your mana on all turns, whether it's your turn or their turn, or whenever you can, and highlighting a maximum use of mana. And one of the things that's really interesting to me, and I think the reason that I'm struggling in this format, is that, and I say struggling, and it's like, it's about 50% win percentage, but like, I went 6-6 with Domain, some of that being having to concede for my kids, and then today I went 0-3 with Golgari, and before that I went like 7-3 with Blue-White. And the whole format just feels, I don't know, like it almost feels like a format where nothing is great and almost like nothing is good. And that's interesting. Like, that's normally a format that I would want to play something like Green-Red Ramp, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to beat the BS and then, have a game plan against the good stuff. But I don't think that's where this format is. And so my always improving moment is like trying to find incremental advantages where those are important, because that is almost what this format is about, without it really being a mid-range v mid-range format, even though Esper mid-range is the most popular deck. And that's so weird to say. Like what do you mean? Like, well, because of Rafine, you don't ever get to play those incremental advantage mid-range games unless, like, you're playing specifically Golgari versus Esper. Everything else just turns out to be like, they're going to pull ahead here, here, and here. There's not a way to combat it other than disrupting them in these ways. And I don't know. It's really interesting. I know this is, like, probably weird to just hear ramblings on the podcast before the RC, but it is very different than it was 8 months ago. And I'm not really sure of the solution, other than things like what Like the blue-black deck that did well in Canada looks really well positioned. Just doing different stuff that's in that, like, I'm going to ignore parts of the metagame make a lot of sense. But that's just my thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like a lot of times people want super well-balanced, quote-unquote, healthy formats, right? And we've kind of got it to, like, what people want. There's, like, 7 or 8 decks you can play that are all about the same, you know, right? And it's you're feeling lost, and, you know, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, like, we were talking about it as a group today, and it's like, yeah, it's not a bad format. Like, it's really fun. The gameplays are all really interactive, and your sequencing and your turns matter. But it's almost like if you took Modern and stretched it, like you're just like literally taking it and stretching it like a taffy, and you're like, instead of like 3 decisions on this turn mattering, it's actually 1 decision on these 3 turns mattering. And that's what matters. And it's elongated, and, you know, that I don't think it's a problem, but it's different.
Yeah, I mean, I think that another thing that I've experienced in, and really just in Standard and just in the game as a whole for the last 5 years or so is a shift away from, like, to your point, incremental advantages kind of piling up and, like, that being where edges are had, to, like, the game being a lot more about, like, snowballing or preventing the snowball. And, like, you cited Rafine as an example of that, where, like, Rafine is a card that, if left unchecked, will run away with the game on its own. Or even just, like, with your game plan on its own. It'll make it so that you're consistently doing the best thing in your deck and also, you know, clocking your opponent and closing the window on the game. And that makes for a world where if everyone's decks are trying to do their thing that snowballs the game or goes over the top of whatever people are trying to do, right? Instead of snowballing, it's just causing an avalanche. Then the games feel like the power level of the decks winds up feeling pretty similar because all the decks are trying to snowball a thing. And then it becomes a game of, like, within that, when the decks are in the same space and the same power band or, like, the same sense of interaction, it feels like it's more about then, like, how do I gain the percentage points within the context of these 2 decks playing each other than necessarily like, oh, I'm just playing the deck that does the most powerful thing or has the best way to pull ahead.
I think that we've also got to the point where it doesn't matter sometimes. So, for example, today I was playing Golgari just to test it for my friend for the RC, and, like, my Esper opponent mulled a 5. I was on the draw. They played a land tapped. I played Duress, took their only spell. They were left with Rafine and something else. They drew for their turn. They played Bat, took my removal spell, played Rafine, and just won the game. Like, it just wasn't even close at that point. And I don't think that that's a problem with Standard. I think that it is, like, kind of what you're saying, Abe, is, like, understanding what things have become. And I think that can be a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, and when you're in the same power band, and this is, like, why I think Esper is most popular at the Pro Tour, in part, is that, like, when you're in the same power band and same lane as a Rafine specifically, of, like, okay, well, my deck is going to gain some incremental advantages and attack, and that's going to, like, I'm going to win with creatures and play some interactive spells. Like, having Rafine means that you're going to do that better than everyone else. If you're getting attacks in, you're sculpting your hand, you're, you know, making your clock better, and so you're going to do that way more consistently, and the other decks don't get to do that. So, you know, having situations like that where, right, you take their only spell and then they're like, oh, well, I drew a thing to make my Rafine now immediately good, and then even if you wind up drawing out of this, I'm going to have, like, drawn 3 cards and discarded 3 cards and maybe hit you for, like, 6 points of life swing with this bat. And that can be pretty brutal, too.
What about you, Mason?
Yeah, so my always improving moment came from just watching social media, and I, you know, apologize to Kendrick for anything I've ever said or done. No, my always improving moment, comes from this past weekend. I sort of woke up at the last-ish minute drove to a modern, like just a little, like, spend some money and then, it goes in the pool and people play for that tournament. And I had grabbed my deck off my desk here, just like, grabbed it and left because I had played it at F&M. And it's actually still here, but my sideboard was right here. For some reason, just wasn't in the deck box. And I didn't realize this, and I'm about an hour from where the tournament is. And so I arrive at the tournament, and I have this Bant Blink deck. And I pull out my deck because I had brought the 2 cards in my card that I wanted to switch in my deck. And I go to sleeve them up, and I was like, oh, I got to put them somewhere different. I realized I don't have a sideboard. Somehow only 3 cards were still there, And I was like, oh, what do I do? I don't want to spend money. I don't want to rebuy Force of Vigors or whatever. And so I just kind of put some cards from my Blue-White Pioneer deck from the RCQ I'd played the day before, and I took them out and I put them in my sideboard. I put some Hallowed Moonlights in my deck. I put some Dovin's Vetoes, just sort of build an ad hoc sideboard, bought a couple Tormod scripts, and just played. And, I ended up top 4ing the Modern event, and it was a really awesome thing for a couple reasons. One, it was, I think, the last Modern tournament I'm going to get to play before the release of Modern Horizons 3. So it was a really cool send-off, playing a deck I really like, and kind of this cool story behind it. And 2, it really shows that, playing well matters so much more than anything else, right? This sideboard I have here is actually, I think really well built for my deck's trying to do. I really like it. I put some time into it. But I was able to, get some cards that were, okay-ish, They're not the worst. So, I even have, a Dovin's Veto in my real sideboard. I got one there. And I just played the games and, thought about, okay, normally, I'd have Force of Vigor for this matchup. I would fight on these things. How do I play differently now? I need to prioritize things differently because I don't have those tools. And, I was able to overcome those challenges. And it was just a really cool experience and just reminded me that, having the perfect sideboard, having the perfect deck list, those things matter, but playing Magic well matters so much more. And that was my most improving moment.
Dude, I had an RCQ. Not to discount your experience, but it wasn't even an RCQ. It was back in the day that they were GPDUs. And I showed up and I counted my deck 5 times. I was like, what the F is missing? And I realized that there were no scape shifts in my green-red scape shift deck. And it was so funny because I was we were at the perfect number of players for some reason. It wasn't 16. I don't remember how many we were at. But I was like, I gotta drop. And people were like, no, don't drop. This is the reason you don't want to drop. Just play this. And they were here, I'll give you hours of promise. I'll give you everybody was offering all of these cards for me to play. And I was like, yeah, I'm not playing Scape Shift without Scape Shifts. But well,
that's also not really a deck you play, right? You can sequence perfectly and do everything, but you don't have the thing that makes your deck work, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. If you were missing Rafines, I bet you could have been you know what? Yeah, I will play with Gix. I can make decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
I can do that.
It's too funny.
Yeah.
I gotta ask you, I think that would be tilting to most players. You just kind of just ran with the punches, rolled with the punches there, Mason. How do you do that?
Who cares? It happened. It's funny. I don't know. I had the thing occur. It's not the end of the world. My life's gonna go on. I'm pretty blessed, all things considered. And I don't know. I honestly have no idea why the sideboard isn't in the deck box. That's the thing that I've been thinking about a lot is why did I take it out? But no, it's just whatever. And I had stuff and I asked a friend, I was like, do you have anything? I would love a Spell Pierce, and he was like, I don't have it. I have this, and he shows me an Underworld Breach, and I'm like, don't have red mana. Really love the offer though. Would have been great for the grinding matchups, And it was just, I don't know, things are going to not go your way, and you have to play through them. It's not that different than playing a bunch of matchups where your sideboard doesn't even matter. I even hit some spots where it was better that I had these things. I played against Rhinos. And I had, I mentioned having one veto in my real sideboard. I had a couple of vetoes and a couple of Hallowed Moonlights. That was great. I was able to play the games differently and just kind of get there. And I also had a deck that really let me, it was helpful. I had a deck that let me actually play Magic. If I was playing like you mentioned, Mr. Scape Shift, I just couldn't have played. If I don't have the thing my deck is doing, I can't play. But if I'm playing a Bant mid-range deck, just doesn't matter. You know, if I'm playing like Iceman, Coatl, Ephemerate, Eternal Witness, I can just game. Like I can overcome these things with skill. So
I love it. Abe, what about you?
Yeah. So my always improvement comes from playing the team event in Richmond over the weekend, where I played the Gruul Slickshot Prowess deck that I've been working on most of the week prior. And for those wondering at home, our team went, let's see, we died in round 7 of 8 on day 1 to drop to 4-3. I personally went 1-6 in the Pioneer seat with that deck. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. One is that I think I needed to remind myself, and would have benefited from reminding myself, that, you know, the Magic Online metagame is a lot more homogenized and condensed than the paper metagame is. People play the things they like to play in paper, especially in, like, you know, team tournaments or whatever. You're going to get people who are not necessarily just doing the optimal thing. And that really showed. I played some really unwinnable matchups. I knew my deck well enough to know what I had to do to have a chance, and I navigated the games. Like, some of the losses I had also were just to the structure of my deck. Like, you know, you play a deck like a Prowess deck or a Burn deck to get yourself in a spot a lot of the time where you need to draw a spell or two to, like, prowess your way to victory. If you don't have that, you lose. And I got in those high leverage spots with, like, you know, 80% or 75% equity and bricked, and that happens. But like some of the other matchups I played, it was just not. It was hard to. It's hard to explain just how, like, bad my deck could have been. Like, I can't imagine a worse matchups that I played in some of the spots.
I have a lot of thoughts on your always improving moment, but I feel like they are better. Like, this isn't the right time to, like, talk about it. But I would be curious if you sent me your matchups for us to, like, talk about how your deck differed from conventional Prowess and, like, what that meant.
Yeah, I mean, do I think that my deck could have had a better green-black Insidious Roots matchup? Possibly. Do I think that any version of Gruul Prowess is going to beat a deck that went turn 2 Prosperous Innkeeper, turn 3... what's the legendary mount from the new set that scries 2 and then flickers things? And then turn 4, like, cast Skyclave Apparition on my Slick Shot and then flickered it out and then exiled my Monastery Spear 2. You know, no, I don't think another build Gruul Prowess would have won those matchups necessarily. And even, I don't think I needed to change much to beat the Insidious Roots player. I think I needed to, that was one of the spots where I had, like, I needed a Prowess trigger or a point of damage, literally them at 1 life. In both.
You're great. I love this.
So, like, yeah, listen, I spent a lot of... This is a unique thing about team events. I did, like, 3 events worth of losing in 1 afternoon. Okay? I sat there and I played out 7 rounds. I won 1 round against Nibtolite, where I knew I was supposed to win. And then I, like, bricked against Lotus, bricked against Vampires, both of which I've been doing very well against in testing and think are favorable matchups.
I agree.
You know, well, it's just a lot. You don't come out of a day like that not thinking about your day and what you could have done differently. So I'd love to get
be fair. You told me your record. I just assumed that you played against Ledger Shredder and Waste Not, like, the whole day.
No, I didn't touch a single Ledger Shredder or a single Waste Not. I played against 1 Black-Red X mid-range deck. It was a very different metagame than I expected, to be honest. Like, based on everything that I know from playing the format of Moto and everything I, like, know from the format local to me in terms of, like, the RCQ scene, a lot of those decks were not represented. And that was just really, you know, a thing to be reminded of, especially after not being in the team event streets in a long time, because there aren't as many. But also, like, you know, we're going to get into a bit with Pioneer here on this episode, but giving myself, like, by playing a deck like Gruul, I really did limit myself in terms of what my game plans could be. You know, I didn't have a lot of access to a bunch of different angles of attack. I am a pretty one-note deck in terms of how I can attack the format. I'm attacking by trying to race my opponent, or trying to, like, you know, use some of my unfair elements to, like, deal a bunch of damage really quick and end the game in stage 1. That does not work against a bunch of things in the format that maybe have different rules of how they're, you know, different barriers they'll put up in front of me. and my deck was not well equipped for those things, whereas some of the other decks that are typically the ones you consider like the better or best decks in the metagame have broader game plans for, right? They're doing things that are more generically good and interactive than what my deck was doing, and I think that really showed in terms of my inability to handle that not homogenous metagame. And I think if I did it again, as much as I liked my deck and thought that it had a lot of game and a lot of matches that mattered, and was even favored in some of them that I didn't play against, like, it was not as good a choice for the tournament as I thought it would be, because I wasn't considering a lot of the, like, quote unquote other of the metagame in terms of what I needed to be fighting against.
If you missed it last week, we went really deep into Gruul after the episode. If you're a patron of $5 or more, you get access to the early access episodes, and we do a little bit of a pre-show, a little bit of a post-show, gives you a little bit of bonus content, gives you the access to the show 2 days early. If you want access to that, head on over to patreon.com/CCG, become a patron of $5 or more.
I want to ask Abe a question, and I'm going to put on my misplaced ginger glasses real quick here and ask you, do you feel like you should have played a deck with more agency and like the ability to play more dynamic games? Because, kind of joking aside.
I'm getting real close to the mic here.
He cut all the agency from his deck. He cut Questing Druid from the main deck, completely removing his ability to battle on like half the axes the format is about.
Okay, we can get into Questing Druid versus Rimrock Knight here, right now.
I don't want to. I feel like that's a whole entire podcast worth of like us arguing, but you removed your ability to like play any type of game other than the game that you were already playing, and then just said that you couldn't win those games. And it's like, well, obviously you couldn't win those games. You removed the only card that lets you do that. The only thing that gives you like an ability to like battle in the streets of those other decks.
Okay, I still had access to Questing Druid in my matches.
I totally understand that. I'm not saying you didn't.
And B, in my game ones, I didn't like. I think Questing Druid is a terrible game one card. It's so much mana you don't have to spend.
That's
like
fair.
Rimrock Knight does everything I need the card to do in terms of being a spell and a threat, which is what I actually want out of Questing Druid. Like 90% of the time in my game ones, and Questing Druid is overcosted for what I'm getting out of it.
Can I ask you a question? Because this is something that we talked about on the podcast. So you have a hand that has Kimono. Or is it, what is it? Is it
Kamano?
Kamano
faces Kakuzan.
And you have Questing Druid. Are you playing Questing Druid on 2?
I mean, it really depends on the hand. I'm likely not playing Questing Druid on 2 for the Kimono trade. I mean, it depends on the matchup. It depends on so much. That's not a question I can answer.
Why is playing another X2 better?
Why is playing Rimrock?
Which is what you really liked, is that you really liked the 4.
Because I'm not playing either of those cards to cast them on turn 2.
But see, this is why I didn't want to have this conversation on, like, here. I love it, man. Like, I love
when we talked about it last week, we were talking about, like, yes, I would play, there are times I would play Rimrock on 2. I would not want to play Questing Druid on 2 because the effect, like, I'm really playing Questing Druid for the impulse effect, and the body afterwards is like an afterthought.
I think that after testing, after we talked, that I do it more now, and it's winning me more games, to just play it after it, and, like, if they kill it, fine. Like,
Well, I think that it depends on what your alternative is. Like, that's why I can't answer the question, is the context. Because if I have, like, if you're telling me I'm playing no creature onto the board on turn 2, I absolutely can't do that. I have to play something on turn 2. I can't play Kumano's empty board. Like,
I think you can. It just depends on what, like you said. Like if the opportunity is for me to plot a.
Yeah, I can't do nothing. I can't do nothing to develop.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I need to develop my game plan. And if playing Questing Druid or playing Rimrock Knight on turn 2 is what I need to do that, I need to do that.
I totally derailed this.
Given how, like, I have a Kumano trigger on 2, am I playing Questing Druid? It's like, what are the other 5 cards in my hand?
I derailed this, Mason.
What I should have, Mason.
Yeah.
You can put the misplaced ginger glasses in the trash because they're clearly broken.
Are those the ones I bought you?
They are. Yeah, I found them.
And
thought
no,
that'd
what
be
I should have
better.
done is I should have just done what I spent all the time testing to do in addition to working on the Skrull deck. And I should have just eaten my vegetables and played boring Treasure Cruise deck that never loses because it's just the best deck in the format. It doesn't matter what you do about it. It's just the most consistent garbage you have to play and deal with. So I should have done that.
I think it's going to get into the main topic. For what it's worth, we're talking about Pioneer this week. We're going to have kind of a free-flowing conversation. I think we can't talk about Pioneer without talking about Phoenix, right? And so, not to kind of like throw us off too much there, but we're going to get into this really, but like when you think about sort of the question I asked, I bring up because there was a would you keep or mole on Twitter recently that basically was one land. It was like a swamp, immutable. No, yeah, it was just swamp. The Sorin combo on the play, and like I think a fatal push or something, and then some other stuff. And they were on a 7-card hand. Maybe they're on the draw. I'm just remembering a little bit. It's been a little while. And basically, this person wrote out like a pretty lengthy like pros and cons, and they were really curious what other people thought and if they had thoughts they want to add. And I thought it was a really interesting sort of like actual good use of Twitter for talking about Magic. And Bullwinkle, one of the people who tests with Handshake and is like does incredibly well on Magic Online, came in and like commented a little bit. But the thing that really stuck with me was he said, "I think you are undervaluing how much equity you get in just getting to play Magic. And this hand has a high chance of not getting to play." And I think that one of the things that like Questing Druid does, for example, is it gives you a chance to play more games that are different because it bails you out of spots that other cards cannot. Inversely, Rimrock Knight also does that, I think, and Picnic Ruiner, right? Like those cards, they both open different doors. One just opens seeing more raw cards, and the other opens the games being quicker. But it kind of does open sort of the conversation towards Phoenix, because I think Phoenix's biggest strength personally is that it always plays. You know, with 12 cantrips, you like are very easily able to find the first copy of any one card in the matchup you are playing against. And the deck has enough tools to fight against all the main things and lets it allow to like actually play games against people. So, you know, when I asked about this high agency thing, right, it's kind of like, do you wish you kind of maybe played Phoenix? Because it does lack that explosiveness. It is very, everyone's attacking it, is beatable, but it is so consistent it always plays, you know?
I want to talk about something really quick because I agree with everything you just said, Mason. I'm really glad you asked the question. I'm sorry for interrupting it. But I want to talk about something that I think Magic players need to hear. And that is that Abe and I are still friends after this conversation, and neither of us are offended by the other person's opinion on the deck. And that we know that we have differing opinions on the deck and on the card choices and still get to have the conversation. And I feel like so often, Abe, you're not married to yours, right?
No, not at all. Me and Rimrock Knight are getting divorced.
Well, sure. Okay.
You were married. Me and Switchshot go off. We had our moment in Vegas. We're getting that annulled.
Abe, do you know that I got married at an SCG Vegas?
I did not know that.
It's so funny. It's unreal.
Anyway, I just want to say, like, I see things like in our Discord or in other Discords or on like Facebook communities where you question somebody's thought of a card, right? And like, I didn't question Abe on Ravenlock Knight. I immediately put Ravenlock Knight in my deck, tried it out. I think that we as Magic players need to be not married to ourselves in our evaluations of things. And like, who cares if somebody on Twitter or in your Facebook group or your community thinks that you're wrong about something? Because at the end of the day, you're just going to be where you're going to be based upon your decisions. And that's really what's important. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say on that. Hey, Mason Clark, tell me about Heavy Play.
Heavy Play is a luxury deck, box, and card game accessory company. You can check out their stuff at heavyplay.com, and you can use code CCMTG to get 10% off. They have stuff all up there. They are the people with the curved sleeves, which I would wait a little bit on, and they have great deck boxes and play mats and dice trays. Check it out.
Dude, I gave co-host of Need to Nerd. I had like a pile of heavy play stuff in this room. I was like, hey man, like just go through there, grab anything you want, and give me feedback. And he grabbed a deck box and was like, holy crap, this thing is solid. And I was like, oh yeah, they're like, they're not, it's so funny. People are like, why are they so premium? Why are they so expensive? It's like, all of their stuff is like actually made to last. Like, I've had this playmat since we started the sponsorship, and it is, there's nothing wrong with the playmat, and also like, it's probably going to last me forever. Like, I can't think of anything that would happen other than like the vinyl ripping on the front of it that could possibly hurt this playmat. And I think that if you understand like the idea of buying premium stuff, like if you understand shopping at, I don't know if this is regional, but like Harmons versus Walmart, you understand the quality that you're getting in this type of stuff. And I love Heavy Play for that reason, and I'm excited to see what they do moving forward because they take a lot of feedback. We have one more housekeeping, and then we're going to dive really far into this Pioneer metagame that we're all literally dying to talk about, apparently. But Abe, I want you, as the leader of the bonus episodes now, to talk about like what are we going to do moving forward.
Yeah, so for the patrons we have who are getting the bonus episode, we are going to be, previously we were doing just like a monthly episode, just bring in some thoughts, mailbag stuff, typical podcast stuff. We're going to be changing up the structure on that to be doing a monthly like deck check-in, kind of like a deck of the month situation where you're going to get a chance to hear us talking about just a deck in, typically I think the idea is for us to do the RCQ format, a deck 75, talking about it in the Discord, talking about it on the episode, getting our thoughts on what it is we're playing and why, down in the nitty gritty to really get our thoughts on the format and shoot a little bit something beyond the show that we do currently, which obviously great source of content, always be free. But for our patrons who are putting out that extra bit to support us, we wanted to give something that's a little bit more focused and delivering a little bit more on what we know is what a lot of people want out of patron content to really get that deck to deck content that we have. So that'll be coming starting
the 27th is the record date, so it should be pretty shortly after that.
Yeah, so it's starting this month. So if you want to be in the know about what me, Mason, and Spencer are all thinking and working on, and how we're making the decisions we're making, and get a look into the process for us, please consider becoming a patron of was it $5 more?
$5
to get
more.
That episode.
I plan on making this is something that I plan on doing. I plan on making, like, if I really know a deck and I have a sideboard guide, I plan on making that available to $10 patrons at the same time as that episode. So just be prepared for that. All right, Mason, you've been like chomping at the bit. You're like really excited for this topic. We're going to talk about Pioneer, and I'm going to let you lead on like what is this format, because I think that people are honestly lost.
I mean, I think Pioneer is a format where we have a clear deck that is the best. And it is not Rakdos Vampires, it is Phoenix. And Phoenix is very consistent, it's very good. It's not overwhelmingly good, but it is like very good. And you have to like mean it to beat Phoenix. And Phoenix is setting the bar for everyone else. And decks like Vampires are playing a role in that as well, of course. Like, they are big players, representation in the metagame. But Phoenix is sort of like, if your deck doesn't pass that sort of like litmus test of what's going on, it cannot succeed. You're just fundamentally so far behind.
I think we're in a 3-deck A tier. I actually don't think that there's an S tier in this format, and I want to be clear about that. I think that, like, Is It Phoenix, Rakdos Vampires, and 5-color Niv have made up the format into a way where, like, they ask such different questions that you're in like pretty big trouble if you don't understand what your role is in those matchups. And also, it's really hard because I don't think that Vayne Ripper and Phoenix ask the same questions that people think they do. And because that's actually not what's happening in Phoenix. It's actually Treasure Cruise that's that question in that deck. And then 5-color Niv is like obviously just like honestly the best control deck. I think that if you play like blue-white, you're kind of throwing.
I actually don't think Rakdos Vampires is even that good of a deck. It's just very popular. And like it is incredibly middling as a deck.
Yeah, I think that Rakdos Vampires is a way. Oh, I want to make this clear before you challenge that. I want to say I'm in Mason's boat. I think that Rakdos Vampires is absolutely a product of the fact that it won the Pro Tour. But what people just like, I bring this up in conversation, like when I'm talking about the deck to people at events, and like giving my opinion on it in person. Many people who might have talked to me in Richmond would remember me saying this, which is that the deck is just like was carried in a lot of ways by the presence of the regular Rakdos midrange deck and being an unknown quantity in those events. But no one plays the regular Rakdos midrange deck anymore. Your absolute best matchup, like, no longer exists. That deck is just gone for people who are also playing Rakdos Vampires, and that makes your deck a lot worse, and also highlights, like, there's a real trade-off in becoming this Vampire deck of, like, you get the higher power level of having, like, Sorin and Vayne Ripper and these synergies, but you lose a lot of the consistency that made you, like, a deck that absolutely bullied, like, other portions of the format. So it's just, I don't know, the deck is not nearly as good as representation says it is. And I think the deck is, like, you know, really powerful and demands respect, but it's not the same level like Rakdos midrange a year and a half ago in terms of, like, how good it is contextually in the format.
Yeah, I would also really quickly, just to make sure I'm clear, because this happened a lot in coaching. Like, if you told me I had to play Rakdos Vampires or a random deck, so, like, you know, save my life in Pioneer, I'm taking Vampires. Like, there is still some good things about it. I do not think it is, like, bad. I just think it is overhyped, and like kind of agree with what Ava's saying. Like, I think it is good, but it is not like great. It has spots of being great if it hits the right stuff.
This is why I love these conversations, because I think we're actually really close. The thing that I disagree with is that I actually think that the most overrepresented deck in the format is actually Phoenix. If we just look at the number of matches played that counts Magic Online that we've recorded in the last 30 days, Rakdos Vampires has a better win percentage with 297 matchups, and Izzet Phoenix is at 51 with 314. Also, as we already know, Rakdos has a good Rakdos Vampires has a good Phoenix matchup. Like,
it's also so much easier to play.
Yeah, it's crazy easier to play. I don't disagree. I just I'm thinking about like the RCQ listener that like we're trying to appeal to here, right? And like. You know, I've taken so many seasons off the last year and a half. So like I'm not even like in the streets the way that I was. But you know, today I was talking to my teammates. They're like, you know, Spencer, what are you going to play this weekend? Like, I know that you're playing, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to play Gruul, but if I don't, I'm going to play Rakdos or Phoenix. And I don't think that that's that unreasonable of a take in this format. And the reason why is that, well, I have a couple things. I think that the format has become about a couple things. One of them is, can you beat a turn 3 Vayne Ripper? I think that you can be faster. You can be not caring about it. Like, you can just be like, all right, whatever. Like, congratulations on your 6-5. Like, let's go. And then you can also just be like, it doesn't matter in the long term type of situation. And I kind of, you see that in both. What's funny is, like, obviously Phoenix has a bad matchup, but like, Abe, how does Phoenix beat a Vayne Ripper? It negates it, right? Through raw cards.
I mean, it like beats Vein Ripper itself by usually like interacting with the Sorin on the stack or just like lightning axing it.
Yeah.
And having a creature in play. Just trudges along.
I think there's like a lot of stuff. The thing that I am curious about, kind of before we move on, is we talked a lot, was it 3 weeks ago, about Pioneer, and we talked about the mono black deck. I am shocked at the popularity of this mono black deck. I think this deck is fine and is very good against two of the decks that I talked about. I think it's good against Phoenix. I think that it's good against vampires. I think it's garbage against the rest of the format at this point. Like, I'm shocked that people want to be waste-notting people at this point of the metagame.
I mean, I'll say I haven't played that deck much. When I played against it, though, I think that it like really highlights the kind of what Mason and I were saying about Rakdos vampires having an inherent weakness of like being the vampires deck, but inherent strength of being it is like if you say you want to play all of the powerful things in black that are not, are not vein ripping people and play it from a different angle, I think the Waste Not deck makes some amount of sense. Right, you're just piling on the interaction that makes your deck like a more controlling mid-range deck than something that's trying to present threats.
I'm so excited for Mason to like go off on Waste Not after you've done.
But like, I think there's obviously room for improvement there in terms of like, is Waste Not a better, like, is it a necessary evil that we have to play it in this shell, or like, is it that people are kind of off the idea of playing like I guess in my mind something I haven't tried yet or thought about trying is like, 'cause I've tried some of the mono black mid-range decks that don't have Waste Not and they've felt kind of underwhelming as well. Is like, I don't know, Fable of Mirror is really good, guys. We thought about just like going back to playing Rakdos mid-range for more controlling slant.
Dude, for real though, right?
Not stuff. And I think the other thing is like, and this is something I felt has been highlighted by the success of Phoenix when like I've played with it and also played against it and thought about like where the games go well or wrong, is that there's a real power in your deck being consistent and just like, a big strength of Phoenix is that it just doesn't lose to like the BS. It just does the same thing over and over again and slogs through and grinds through everything. And the mono black Waste Not deck definitely is a deck that uses its land. Makes the games really like slog down so it gets a lot of draw step, but uses its lands really well to just enact the same game plan too. Like it has a lot of consistency baked in with like, copies of Sanitarium, things like, has like the fields and stuff to slow people down in terms of like using any of their mitigation to discard spells and these effects. And also uses like creature lands and Castle Locthwain to just kind of trudge along and cross the finish line, which I think is like a necessity in the format if you're going to play for an angle that is not.
I think it uses its mana like better than most decks, if not all the decks in the format. Like, especially because it gets to play Citadel to like do its thing. It gets to punish any decks that are like greedy on their mana base. Like my problem with mono black is that it's like Divergent. It's like a removal and discard deck, and if one of the halves of that aren't good, it's a problem. I mean, that being said, like it's kind of like a fine win percentage, just like 59% the last 30 days. Mason, you hate Waste Not. Just go off.
No, I just mean like the Waste Not deck when I played it to learn about it and see what was up just taught me that like stripping my opponent on low resources and sticking a Shieldred is a viable win condition. I just like was very unlucky at drawing the card Waste Not during like all the games I played with it, and I was still able to win games, right? And that taught me like I don't need this card. That's just a card that complements my main deck Go Blanks really well, right? And like all these other cards I want to play. And if I'm wanting to like if I want to like mitigate my opponent's removal being effective, this is another thing I can do. And make it so things like, Lightning Axe are a bit more punishing, etc. Blood is a bit more punishing for my opponents. So like being a mono black or black X like mid-range deck that's goal is like, hey, I'm going to like run you out of resources. We're going to trade cards, and I'm going to then stick a Shieldred. I think is like a very viable thing. And this deck's just approaching that in one way, which I think is worse on average than just playing like Deep Cavern Bat and Graveyard Trespasser instead of Goblink and Waste Not in your main deck, you know, and having like more things in that direction. I played against a deck this past weekend that had like a bunch of Bitter Triumphs and Forsaken Miners, and like that was an interesting direction too, where like the target of Vein Ripper, discard the Miner with the Crime trigger, brought it back, sacked it to the ward. You know, I was like, oh, that's cool. You know, like they had Copter in their deck, and they were like much lower to the ground, and like get a lot of Gixes, and I think some other 3-drop creature and 2-drop creatures, and they just were like very low to the ground, trying to play like, you know, almost more like the mono black aggro deck, but still had some Shieldreds and like those removal spells to kind of like get them there. So, you know, I think like when we think about sort of what's going on with the format, running your opponent out of resources is like a pretty good thing when backed up with pressure. Decks like Niv are very hard to do that against, you know, but it is like, you know, a pretty reasonable thing. We do see Niv sort of succeed in a similar way, right? Of run your opponent out of resources, then stick a big thing and win. They use like a Niv instead of a Shieldred, but it's like a very similar idea.
Abe, you said adding, you know, just the best card in Magic and Fable to this deck. And after Mason talked, I wondered about Bloodthirsty Adversary as like the other red card that gets to just really ram home your opponent's resources, pressure them in multiple ways. It's like what I was doing like a year and a half ago in Rakdos, like actual Rakdos midrange, but like making it about resources.
Yeah, I think my only fear with that, and that's something like back to what we're saying about the lands and about like the amount of mileage that gets out of those, is that you make your mana a lot worse to do that, and you lose a lot of that equity that currently has, and kind of being able to like
just by adding red.
Yeah, by like adding red, you're gonna make your mana base contain like, you probably can't continue to play Sunken Citadel. You can't play so many Castle Locthwains. Your swamp count's gonna get lower. You can't play fields, and you know, there's a lot of things that have to change in your deck, and I think that does change your ability to consistently constrain a game, right? Like, Field of Ruining your opponent does, in a lot of matchups, does slow down their ability to develop, or it does take away their ability to draw, difficult to interact with resources. Like letting you trade your land for their land that matters is really valuable in some of the matchups where your game plan is to just attrition them out. And I do think that obviously Fable is really good. It makes a lot of decks better, but also, you know, I'm not going to say it's not a free thing to do just because it's the one card. Like adding red lands to your deck and adding a bunch of red mana to your deck does have a bunch of costs in the mana.
We talked about Gruul. We talked about like some of the other decks, but I made a pretty clear statement of Rakdos or Rakdos, Phoenix, and Niv Delight being the A tier of this format. Do either of you disagree? Like, am I missing something?
I mean, I think Amalia deserves to be higher. I think that especially as the metagame has shifted with like blue-white being pushed out more, and like Niv being a bit more susceptible to just a deck going quickly, like Amalia seems better. I think that really, and I would say that really would round out my top 4. I'd say they're all like in the tier of like, these are the best decks in the format to pick up and play. And then like with Lotus, maybe like behind that is like the top of B tier if you're going to do it like that. Because they just do have a really resilient and consistent, powerful plan that beats a lot of the breadth of the format by doing its thing. Like, it forces other decks to warp their plans around what it's doing. And that seems good enough to me to be in the conversation. I think it's also definitely a deck that has like lost some of its worst matchups. Like, Blue-White was one of the most popular decks in Pioneer up until Proto Chicago, and then that like really changed. And I think that like has not really reflected in how much Amalia has been played. And I think it's also underrepresented on Magic Online because people don't want to deal with playing it on Magic Online.
I want to be clear that I've played like 10 matches of Pioneer and probably over 100 matches of Explorer in the last couple weeks. And there's some decks that I have really strong opinions on that I just want to just pop off about. The first one is Mono Red Wizards. That I don't believe that there is a matchup that this deck is better than Gruul in. And I also would be surprised if it was better than Izzet in any matchups. I think Wizards Lightning is like sweet, like right, like you get a lightning bolt, but it doesn't work with what the deck's trying to do. And I have a hard time on this one. Your mana is perfect, but like the way that the mana is constructed in the Gruul decks and the Izzet decks is perfect. Like you are the aggressive deck, and you never struggle on mana. It's not like that. And all the things that you're guarding against, like there could be some that I'm wrong about, but like I mean maybe I'm wrong because this says that like your favorite against Mono Black and Izzet Phoenix, but like Azorius Control already favored. Niv, you're already favored. I think that you're favored against Lotus Combo. I think you're favored against Ensoul, which is the other deck I want to talk about. I think that you should not play Mono Red in this format for cost reasons, because I think that I did the math and it's only like it's under $80 to play a different version. Mason?
I also just think Heroic is better than both these decks. I just don't think Heroic is better. Heroic is better Gruul. Like, I'm pretty positive of that the more I've thought about it and like watched games play. So like it's a weird thing to me where it's like I'm even like a step removed from it of like, you know, like the Mono Red deck is fine, right? And like, you know, if it's what you can afford and like it's definitely not terrible. It has some good stuff going on. And like Shieldred is at an all-time low in the format, and Shieldred plus interaction was sort of like a huge thing, putting pressure on this deck. But like when it comes to aggressive decks, like I feel like Heroic is sort of the best of those that is trying to be like linear in like executing a quick clean kill. You know, like and Soul is like a deck that tries to like kill you quickly with interaction and sort of try to play that kind of game, which I think like is really the role of vampires in the format. And I see a lot of decks in the format do the classic error right now of being a worse version of another deck. And that is just like Pioneer to a T in my mind.
Yeah.
And like, Izzet Ensoul is like Clock plus Disruption. And it's like Vampire's just like Clock plus Disruption.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to get into Ensoul. I want to challenge you really quickly. The win percentage that I put into the show notes was only in the last 30 days. And Boros Heroic has a worse win percentage than Mono Red and Gruul Prowess. But I don't agree with you. I think that I would be worried that maybe not a word. I'm going to challenge myself to play that this week before my RCQ. Because you said this. This is not the deck that I normally play, but I guess I would never normally play like these Gruul Prowess decks other than that I did it in Standard for a year or so. I love that. The other thing that I would say, though, is that the data doesn't agree with you. Like, the data says that it's actually worse than Ensoul, which I don't agree with. This is the deck I want to talk about. I think this deck is garbage. I think that this deck has... I mean, if you just look at the data, it has close to 0 good matchups. All of its good matchups are like 1 or 2 matches total played. You should not play this deck. I know that it's like $11, but holy crap. I don't think that Ensoul is close to worth it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a like third best in class at what it's trying to do. I mean, back to kind of what you were saying about, and really just chime in on like my thoughts on the slick shot stuff explicitly, like in terms of the different slick shot decks. My reasoning for not really loving Heroic as much as you do, Mason, like after thinking about it, because we did talk about it when you asked, like when I was trying to pick McRuner stuff, if like I thought this was better than Heroic, if I was trying to be the same thing, is that I think that it's a lot easier for Heroic to get caught without a protection spell and therefore picked apart when like really a big strength of like Gruul is that it gets to play protection spells with its Slick Shots. And Slick Shot is obviously a really good card. It's like really breathed light into the entire like red aggressive space in the format. It's brought back, you know, like Wizards to as deck people played, the Gruul, you know, Tarka's Command, whatever, like all these different red decks are really because Slick Shot exists. But I think that, like, to your point, I think that it's the deck that's most naturally equipped to play protection spells and a high density of spells and make that matter in terms of, like, you know, you're already playing like Homestead Courages and you have like way more things that are effectively Slick Shot, right? You've got your Virtuosos and you've got, you know, all these heroic creatures that stack really well with the spells, and you want to be casting spells in your main phase. These are all things that make Slick Shot better. But at the same time, like, you're kind of relying on your best creatures to live, and Slick Shot especially causes you to be more all in necessarily than Heroic does, where Heroic you kind of cast like a spell a turn with like, and your Virtuoso draws like cast like 1-2 spells like Connive and do that, and those are the ones that really set that deck apart. And I think that like Slick Shot's being a worse Virtuoso, not being a star there, in terms of like the play patterns, and that wasn't really very appealing to me in terms of like what you get out of playing the other versions of decks with Slick Shot, where either you're setting up Slick Shot, like you're setting up your other prowess creatures to like eat the removal that Slick Shot's going to benefit from having been spent, and then follow up with like Slick Shot capitalizing on your other cheap spells, or you know, vice versa, where you're giving them the threat of Slick Shot protecting your other things. So it's like, it kind of depends on how you want that card to interact. I think that's an important spot for the format to like pay attention to. I do think that any Slick Shot deck is a better way to attack the format than playing in Soul right now. I think that like a number one answer people are playing to things with Vein Ripper is pick your poison, and another thing people are doing is just packing a bunch of ways to like you're also in the class of decks that get beat up by like temporary lockdowns when they show up. Like, you're asking to be really easy to target and not even be the best in the class of what you're doing.
You actually answered the question that I was going to ask, which is like, of the decks that are trying to do this thing, that are like trying to be like these synergy aggro decks, right? Like what happens here? And I think that between all of them, whether it's Boros Heroic, whether it's in Soul Artifact, like, Quick Shot has an inherent advantage in that you get to protect it if you want to, whether it's Spell Pierce, whether it's, you know, a green protection spell. And it is also the reason that I don't like Mono Red. So
yeah, I just don't agree with Abe's like core premise. You just have more protection spells in the Heroic deck, and the favorite Hoplite is protected from all the red removal, which is the most common, but the one at least I care about the most with this deck, with any of my spells. Like, am I mistaken? Like, I'm looking around here, I'm seeing a lot of like 5 to 6 protection spells for Heroic decks, and I'm seeing 4 in Gruul. And like that, like maybe I'm like missing something that's like something scales it out of range consistently, right? In a way that these other cards don't for these things, but you're just not actually like protecting your things better.
I do think that the fact that Snakeskin Veil puts a counter on is typically better than most things, and it's the reason that I have a 2-2 split. But I agree with your premise of like, are you getting out of range of removal spells? Because like, most people are playing their 4th Fatal Push before they're playing their first Cut Down, right? So
yeah, like,
so like I agree that like Hoplite is protected against the red removal spells. Your Defiance Strikes turn that on, and that one is inherently protected. And like, you do play one more protection spell, and you're better at playing protection spells. I think all those are key points that matter. I think that your game plan is more aligned with Slick Shot being good in your game plan of like, I'm going to cast a bunch of spells in my main phase and also have protection to push through the Slick Shot. But I think also it bears the weight of the risk of like, okay, now my deck contains like, right, you're narrowing your game plan and making it stronger. You're tempering yourself to be like, okay, I'm going to be right playing this heroic game plan. I think that is inherently weaker against the like all the non-red removal spell decks, of which like the only red removal spell deck is actually just
I'm
beat,
looking at this,
which is less of the metagame than the Black and Rule spell decks by a lot.
I'm looking at this, Mason, and there's only 5 protection spells in Boros, and a lot of the Gruul decks are playing 5 now too. Like, it's actually not that different.
Right. Well, that's just another point. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm saying that you're in the similar class, but I do think that you're a better deck at playing protection spells as heroic. I'm not going to contest that. And you might even play a higher...
because you're playing creatures that are already better.
Yeah, and your game plan is better for casting spells at sorcery speed to enable the slick shot to be more damage, whereas like in the red decks you have a tension of like spectacle cards not really working that great with slick shot itself, because you're not getting... It's hard for you to get the trigger up front, and you're playing a lot more creatures. But I think that presents the... Like, I think that you're exposing yourself to the risk of being one note, which I think lends the deck being worse.
Interesting. I think your sideboard cards are better at pivoting, but I think game 1, the deck has, like, better interaction. I also just think you care a lot more about Slick Shot in the deck than I do. I care about the overarching, like, goal, and I feel like that is sort of what matters, and Slick Shot is something that is, like, I help this goal.
Okay, well, here's my question.
I want to double down. Hold on. Can I double down on this?
Sure. Double down.
Because I hate Giganta. I don't even understand it at this point. Where, like, it has nothing to do with the deck. It doesn't fit into what the deck is trying to do. Whether you're playing Boros. I mean, the Boros decks are playing it. The Mono Red decks are playing it. The Gruul decks are playing it. And I am lost.
Oh, I mean, I think Gigantha's just good in like a lot of the matchups where you just need more things.
You got to
control or like it's just the den of the bugbear you always draw.
That's not true.
That's my experience. It's a den of the bugbear that starts your pain. It's a 5-mana activated thing that you can do with your mana in matches where like you're just kind of like pumping the brakes and not.
I see. I think that they're like Chandra, the 3-mana Chandra, the red 1/1 that deals 1, makes a mana. Like, there are so many cards that I want to try that...
Then just do it for the beginning of the podcast. If you don't believe everyone, then just do it, right?
I know. I'm just saying, like, this is the part of the podcast where we're supposed to talk about cards. I'm telling you, I don't believe in Giganta. Like, I won a game with Giganta today, and I was like, oh, did I win because of Giganta? And it's like, well, no. Like, if I had drawn a relevant spell in the spot that Giganta was, it also would have happened.
Yeah, but Gigantha's not costing you a relevant spell,
I know,
right? Gigantha's just sitting in your sideboard waiting around. Maybe companions are too good, man.
I already know that. The thing is I already know the companions are too good. I don't think this one fits all the time in aggressive decks like we play it.
I agree, like, holistically. My big question would be, like, what card you replace it with? Does Scorching Shot matter more than 8% of games winning because you've started to flood each big creature?
I'm not just done. I think that it has sideboard cards I can play with Planeswalkers. I think that, like, your whole entire deck can change. In rules specifically, if you're not playing Giganta, I will probably try that after this weekend. I feel like we're like victims of the best mechanic in history, and we should not be.
I guess the big problem I have is, do the spells you're giving up matter more than the spells that are already there in the main deck? And does the one sideboard slot matter more than 8% of games drawing this card that, like, kind of saves you, or, like, you know, like 8% of games getting back into it, right? Like, I start to flood.
Way less than me. It's like played close to 100 matches. I've cast Giganta 2 times.
I've cast Giganta a lot of times and won the game with Giganta a lot of times. I don't know what matchups you're playing. It could just be we're playing different swaths of the format and also drawing differently. But I'll say my experience is pretty counter to yours. Giganta has been very relevant for me.
I love it.
Yeah, it's a big, like, I don't even think it's that good. It's more to me just like kind of that question, right? Like, and I think this is like a good thing for listeners, right? Like, if there's something you don't think is right about something in the format, you have to kind of be like, okay, one, is it like why? And two, what am I going to replace it with? And is it like actually better than this? The answer could very easily be it could. Like, I'm not saying it's unbelievable to me. I'm saying, like you said before, Spencer, like you have to prove it to me. And I think you have to prove it to others. You know what I mean?
Like, no, I love it. Like 3-mana Chandra, 4-mana Chandra, like whatever effing. It's gonna be a double red spell, right? Like it's because of the mana of the deck. So you have to like prove that a double red spell is better than what you're doing now.
Yeah, and you're like low selection deck.
Oh yeah. It has to be like.
And then like that,
I mean, you'd be changing the shape of the deck almost entirely to add these cards, right? These cards are so impactful to your game plan.
And you think of like the 3-mana Chandra, it's like, okay, like I want a minimal number of green spells. It might literally just be 8, right? Like it might just be 2 Audacity, or that's 6 actually. 2 Audacity, 2 Snakeskin Veil, 2 Blossoming Defense, and every other spell has to be red. And it's like a tough question. Like I'm not pretending it's not. Yeah. I'm just questioning the actual like validity of this 5/5. That yes, you get it. I get it to my hand a lot.
See, like, this is the only format I believe Giganta in. Like in Modern, if you have the main guy that loots, that makes some sense because it's like, oh, I get to draw something I can loot, and like if you're in a Traxa deck, like in Pioneer, being able to cast Turn matters a lot. Obviously, these are different decks than we're talking about, but like everywhere else, I'm pretty low on the card. Like I'm pretty with you. I just think that like that 8% bailout matters. In whatever,
it's so funny.
Like,
I played a cubic ton of the Giganta Rakdos. What is the name of
the Transmogrify deck?
Transmogrify deck. Thank you. And I was like, dude, this is the best card in the whole deck. Like, it's unbelievable that I just get to like put this in my hand. My opponent can't kill it, and I just win the game. This deck, the problem is, Abe talked about like the fact that like your opponent plays like a Sheoldred. I've actually just lost to Sheoldred every time I've cast this card.
Oh, I've beaten Sheoldred. I think we're just having different ends of these.
Yeah, like
I think the reality is sometimes the card is good and sometimes the card is
I think that's true. Now, can I ask? Are we done with the double down here, and I can get back to my?
Oh yeah, go for
my
it.
Question for Mason.
Yeah,
which is like, so here's the thing for me. Why we're even talking about Heroic in this conversation, right, is because Slickshot Show Off entered the format, right? Talking about new cards.
I disagree with that premise.
So you would play Heroic agnostic of Slickshot Show Off being played?
Yes, I'm not even sure I want to play 4 of them in my deck.
Okay, so I'm saying I agree with you in terms of Heroic. I think Heroic is just not good, and so I wouldn't play it.
That's a fair place to be. I think your rule deck is a worse Heroic deck.
I think that the Slickshot decks are like have merit, and Slickshot is good enough in them and makes the surrounding shell that is close to good enough in those colors much closer to being in contention and worth exploring, as opposed to like putting Slickshot in Heroic where maybe Slickshot's more enabled, where it makes sense, and like maybe those decks fall short on power level to Heroic, but I think there's strength in the consistency of those decks and being more difficult to dismantle and demanding more different sets of answers than necessarily Heroic does, and Slickshot playing well in there versus maximizing or minimizing Slickshot's impact in a game. And also like you're like Heroic is like, I'm doing the Heroic thing. Slickshot in all these other decks is like Slickshot is adding a dynamic impact and a relevant threat to an existing package of red cards that is already very close to playable or close to good.
I would say I agree with what you're saying in post-board games. Like, I think your ability to play more transformative and different types of games is true post-board. I think the thing is, like, the game 1 deck is, like, I think you are just, like, the worst version of doing that thing. And I do agree with you that, like, post-board, Gruul has the ability to play differing games and more divergent games that are, like, harder to attack than the Boros deck is. Like, I can see that.
I'm going to jump in here. I don't think it's just Gruul. I think that every single other version of this style of deck is better than Boros, according to the data, for the last year. I
don't care about the year.
Hold on.
I don't care about the data.
Hold on. Even in the last 30 days, it's the worst performing deck. Even in the last 60 days, it's the worst performing deck of these decks. I get that in the matchups where you're good, you're the best deck in the format. It's not even close. Like, in the games that you're going to win, you're just going to win them. But that's also true of mono red. That's all, like, I think that while it is true of this deck, it's just not true of the similar decks. And that's where my problem is.
I think all those decks are worse versions of these decks, though.
Dude,
right? I'm not
the
saying,
data
I'm not saying
disagrees with you.
Spencer, multiple times today, you've mentioned the data and say, "Oh, I disagree." You're saying, "Oh, the last year." I don't give I don't care about what the data's saying because I'm talking about right now.
Yeah.
Like yes, the data from months ago is bad, and months ago Mason wouldn't have told you to play heroic. Mason's talking about right now.
I also think right now, Mason. Yeah, I think right now it's undeniable.
All the points were I wouldn't play heroic. Just so it's clear,
I know.
I think that's a bad version of this other deck.
We're diving so far into Slickshot decks.
I wouldn't get off the podcast right now. I'm losing my mind, and it's like we keep talking about this thing. It's like so crazy to me.
Okay, so what? Well, let's go into it. Like, what is?
It's just like not a good deck. Like none of these decks are good.
So you wouldn't play a Slickshot deck at all?
I also think I want to make this clear, and I think I made it pretty clear coming out of my Always Improving. I would not continue to play Slickshot for this RCQ season. However, I do think the shell is close to there. I think it's really good against red black. I think your Phoenix matchup's not good enough. I think your Molly matchup's not good enough. I think you're good against Niv and like Lotus and like good against red black. And bad against, and also good against blue white, but that's not as relevant anymore. Dude, and you're pretty bad against like random.
The color of Mason's face.
I agree with all of those things that Abe is saying. And I think heroic is just better in a few of those spots. Like heroic is better.
I think it sacrifices too much in the black red matchup. I think that's where we disagree.
Okay,
Mason. I'm saying it moves like
Mason.
That's all I was trying to say. And then we were like talking about like Giganta for some reason for like like I just feel like we're all over the place,
dude.
And it's just like. We're trying to talk about like this one little thing, and it's like a small subset of the format. But like, I don't even think it matters that much to the overall format.
Mason, what would you play?
Honestly, I'm unsure. Like, I would love to talk to you all about like some of the other top decks and stuff because the format is really weird. I would tell people to play Phoenix. I think Phoenix is the best deck in Pioneer. I personally don't want to play Phoenix. I'm also already qualified. I hate playing the Phoenix deck. I find playing cantrips boring. And I don't want to do that during a time. If I had to play for like my friends' lives here, I would play Phoenix. If someone's gonna like kill Spencer, I'm like, hand me the Phoenix deck. I gotta do what I gotta do.
Thank you, buddy.
but I'm not going to like do that when I'm playing these other games. So like, I think Phoenix is really good. I think Niv is good, but the mana's awful. Like you go third. Like I love the idea of these decks a couple weeks ago of the like Slickshot aggressive streamline decks and like playing them more just bore out to not feel that way, and it just kind of sucks. I don't know. It's like a really weird spot to be in.
Yeah, I'm like in the weirdest position in this format where like I've already played this standard deck like 100 matches. Now I've played like the Pioneer deck 100 matches, and I believe in myself playing Gruul more than I believe in the deck, for what it's worth.
Sure.
And I think that there are a lot of reasons to play a deck like Gruul. Like we've mentioned, like 4 of them, and why they're good, right? Like they pressure out decks like Hidden Strings, which I think are really bad for the format and bad for a lot of the decks that you might want to play. And then there's also like what I would want to do, and here's where I'm at. I have not played an RCQ yet this season, and what was so funny is I was like, I promised myself I will not play an RCQ without Fable of the Mirrorbreaker in my deck because it's just the best card, and I'm just gonna do that. And then Slickshot happened, and everything else happened in Pioneer. And I'm lost. Like, Mason, I don't know, you're qualified. Abe, I don't even know if you're qualified or if you want to qualify.
No, I still got to play RSQs this season.
Yeah, and I have an RSQ this weekend that's like a 2K. I'm gonna probably play Gruul. I don't know, like, I feel like I'm punting by not playing Fable. I think that, like, you're either playing Phoenix, or you're playing Fable, or you're punting. And I feel like I'm punting.
Do you like the Nibs of Light deck? Because that's like the one Fable deck we haven't really talked about. We kind of mentioned it at the start.
We mentioned it. I don't. I think it has lost the finals of basically every Utah RCQ. It has made it to all of them. And, like, it's like the most overrepresented deck in Utah. It's so crazy. If I was going to play Control deck, that's what I would play. Abe, what would you play?
I would play the Arclight Phoenix deck with a nod to maybe Green Devotion if I felt like casting a Sleight of Hand was going to make me want to leave the room. So,
Hell
like,
yeah,
I don't know.
brother.
Here's the thing. And Mason opened on this when we were still in the Always Improving about, like, you know, do you think you maybe play a deck with more agency? And it's like, do I really have agency when I play Arclight Phoenix? Or am I just a cog?
I have had this argument so many times.
Is that all I am? I am, Spencer?
I've had this argument so many times with Matt, and you do have agency. I think they're pretending like you don't have the most access to your sideboard is like, oh man, I almost swear so much. I think it's absolute crap. You get to see the most of your deck, and your decisions matter the most according to how you sequence.
But my decisions are all binary.
No, they're not. That's not
Does this
true.
card go on the bottom of my deck?
All right.
Does my card go on the bottom of my deck?
No.
Or into my hand? Does it go to the graveyard or into my hand? Of these two cards, does it go in my hand or the bottom of my deck? Is it my sideboard card, or do I need to go deeper to my sideboard?
How do you know?
I can't tell if he's joking.
No, how do you know that that's important?
I'm not agent in the decision.
What are you talking about?
You're the only one agent in the decision.
I feel like I'm so lost on how we got here. Wait, so
what is happening?
Just make sure. Abe doesn't want to play Phoenix because he, like me, hates cantrip. And then, but also said, I'm not that agent in my decision. Spencer said, no, you are. You have a lot of agency. And then Abe is saying no because either you win or you don't. And very essentially,
no. What I'm saying is,
what is
all
happening?
Of the decisions I'm making,
yeah,
are pretty pre-prescribed for me.
Hold on, that's true. Like 80% of the time, but like all the other decisions are like really important.
Yeah, I was Spencer on all of this. I was going to make sure I understood.
They're all
I got confused.
And he hates this deck. Like, what is happening?
I would not play Phoenix.
What is happening?
Consistently doing well with Phoenix. I just hate it. But like, that's like because I already qualified. If I was not qualified, I would have played Phoenix until I did. Then I play RCQs for fun, like I'm doing now. But I think you do have a lot of agency, right? Like I get to make choices, and also early on when I have to cast these, I have to make decisions that matter. Right? Like,
congratulations, you saw 32 cards and 2 of them mattered, and you won because of it, and you would decide if they mattered or not. Is that a 50-50 every time, Abe? Like, what does that mean?
No, every decision is I look at a card and I go,
oh my gosh. Why is that bad?
I feel like I've learned about something like my friends.
What is happening?
It's just like I only kill bad people.
How dare I see a card that doesn't matter and then make it not matter?
Hear me out. When you make, and this is a real thing that I believe.
Nothing you said is real.
Making YouTube videos. This is my hot take. Is that what leads to good like when I talk about agency in Magic or good decisions? Is like you have an amount of like, you know, uncertainty or diversity in the decisions you could make, right? You have a swath of decisions in front of you, and you have to identify and choose the correct one. When you're making decisions in Phoenix, and part of why cantrips, especially Opt, Consider, and Sleight of Hand, are so miserable to play with and boring to play with, is that you're really making a v B decision over and over again, and it's like I'm playing a game where I'm picking right or left over and over again. And it's not very agent. Like it's like because oftentimes the A is a 0 or it's a 10.
This deck was fun. Hold on.
I never said it was fun. I'm just saying that the decision between 0
why
and 10.
It's not fun. You literally just.
I'm not saying whether or not it's fun. I'm saying whether or not there's really a lot of agency I'm expressing in that, which is, I guess, to some people, an expression of fun. But all I'm saying is, how agent am I really when it's like, okay, well, it's not the card I need, so it goes on the bottom. What was the decision there? Identifying it was a card I need, or I decided, do I need this card?
Hold on. You're missing a very key point, Abe. Did it get me closer to Treasure Cruise?
Yeah, true.
That's what I'm saying is not an agent decision. I don't get to choose where the Treasure Cruise is in my deck. I'm playing Candyland over here.
Spencer says he can't F post on Twitter, and here he is. No, but here's the thing. I think actually, like, how I would describe agency, Abe, is like the ability to like play your cards meaningfully different from game to game and player to player. So, for example, you, me, and Spencer all get loaded up in like this sort of like simulation where we have like the exact sort of same spots happen in a game, right? But we play them differently. So a good example might be, turn one, we play a Spire Bluff, and we have like an Opt, a Consider, and a Fiery Impulse, and our opponent plays turn one, a creature, right? How do we choose to play those is an expression of agency in my mind, right?
Okay, and I'm going to say that I think Phoenix is still, by that metric, a very low agency deck.
That is your belief. I think there's some like philosophical things going on.
Dude, we're so
okay.
long. We have to end this episode. And I just want to say, before we go into what we would play and why, this was a test. Like, did you like this? Leave a comment. Maybe leave a review. Like, tell us. Like, we had an open conversation where nobody agreed on anything other than, like, no three of us agreed on anything, I should say. And I think it was fun. I really appreciated the conversation. Abe, if you say heroic, I'm going to lose my mind. What would you play?
I already said I'd play Phoenix unless casting Sleight of Hand would make me want to leave the room and go home. I would play that.
Mason?
I mean, I cannot in good faith tell a listener to play anything besides Phoenix or Nibdelite. I do not believe enough in vampires. It is fine. If you have vampires, don't go buy a new deck. Don't spend $400. It's good enough. But if I had to tell you to play one or two decks, it's like Phoenix 1 and then Niv if you can figure out the mana problems. The mana's just bad.
Vampires is the guy on the blonde podium with the champagne bottle. That's always my view of Rakdos mid in this tier. Is like A, Phoenix, B, like gold Phoenix, silver Niv, and then like spraying himself with the champagne, biting the metal and everything, like just vein ripper.
Yeah, so really quick on the mana thing that you were saying with Niv, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about this week, where it's like, it's so interesting to me because people are like, oh, all check lands with the bare minimum of shocks or all shocks.
It doesn't work that way. Like, I gotta play, I only played one league with it, but like, it is actually a problem. The mana doesn't work out how you would think it would work out. And the thing is, is with the, like, the other versions of the deck, historically, right? Like, you think of, like, the Chain to Rocks deck. They made their mana work with Chain to Rocks, right? So it was all that. And that's not how this mana works. It's like a mishmash of, like, check lands and tri lands. And it's not the greatest.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, right? There's like this contingent online. Like Nick Winsauce really brought up the conversation of like, oh, the check lands are bad because they like you cannot play as many as people were because of Leyline Binding. But if you play a bunch of shocks, then you're like taking a lot more incidental damage.
Yeah.
And so I just think there's a lot of work to be done, and we can't play a lot more Triumph because we're already going third. You just don't do enough in the early game. So it's a really interesting like puzzle to solve. And I think if that gets solved, it theoretically is like a pretty good deck right now.
I can agree with that. I already said the 3 decks that I thought were the best deck. I'm already saying I'm not playing that. I'm going to play Gruul this weekend. If I was not doing that, I think there's like a hard argument for Rakdos right now. And I know these guys disagree, but I'm going to say why. I think that, like, not enough decks are respecting show and tell. Like, or one side of Show and Tell specifically, where you get to do a lot of stuff. There are less and less options depending on how you build your deck. But I think that both Preacher and Vein Ripper are good enough to just win an RCQ. If you're just like, this is free, I'm doing this. And also, I think that, and here's the reason, this is the real reason why. Abe, you and I had a conversation like 8 months ago about Mutavault in Red-Black. And how the best Red-Black performing deck in the world played 2 Mutavault. We were both like, this is too many. You can't possibly do this. This is like asinine on your mana. And now you get to play 4 of them, and it's like pretty happy. I think that's a pretty big deal. That is going to do it. If you want to ask a Patreon question, head on over to patreon.com/ccmtg. Become a patron of $5 or more, and you can ask a question like Jacob, which is, if you had to live without audio, visual, media, music, or literature, which one would you be giving up? I'm going to go first. I listen to an audiobook to fall asleep every night. I'm never giving that up. I'm just going to be honest. I'm going to go with music first. I know that's like crazy. I love music, but I could fill my time with other stuff and be happy. I don't think that like I could ever give up like movies, TV shows, like everything compared to what music gives me, and give up audiobooks. Maybe I could, but that's my answer. What about you, Abe?
I would go with audiovisual. I'm like for me, the impact of media consumption matters a lot. So like reading literature and like watching a show are very similar impact in terms of my attention's occupied, and like music is pretty unique in that it's like the lowest impact of all of those. I can engage with it at many different speeds, whereas like for me to really enjoy a movie or like a show or whatever, I have to pay some amount of attention to it, or like I could have on music instead. So
yeah, I'm just giving up reading. I don't read as is. I was
gonna say, I already knew what Mason's answer was.
I mean, I read like 21 chapters of the Magic manga this weekend because it's like a love story that's really good. That was cool, but also like I could have got that in lots of different ways.
Can I ask you, Mason, like, because I think it's interesting, as somebody that has like dyslexia, like, do you try to do audiobooks versus?
Oh, I just don't engage with books for the most part. I did when there were books I wanted to like read, I would do audiobooks, but also because I could do more things and get more stuff done. Reading a lot for a long time can sometimes be really draining. So like in the same way, watching like subbed anime for long periods of time can be a lot tougher. Like I would say I'm probably good for about a movie. Like I can typically watch like a foreign film and like be good. But like,
do you pause it a lot? Like, how does it work?
No, I don't pause. I just keep going. I have to be like more dialed in, a lot more dialed in. And sometimes I like miss things or I'll misread something, you know. But like, I don't have to like pause it. Every now and again I do if there's like a scene where they're talking very quick and it's like a lot of words on screen at the same time, and they like cut it. Also, really matters on like who's doing that. Like, and just in foreign films too. I've seen films where there's like. The translation team just like, I think to match the vibe or whatever, cut really quickly. And it's just like, oh, I like missed that or whatever. So like it happens. It's just like, if I like, let's say I binge, like, here's a good example. I was getting some stuff done and watched like a bunch of Bleach yesterday because I'm slowly watching Bleach to finish off seeing all those big shows. And like, I could do that. I watched like 4 or 5 episodes and like, that would be like, around that 3rd episode, 4th episode would be the part where I probably need to like take a little bit of a break from watching if it was subbed, because I'd have to be like reading it constantly, you know?
That's how I felt too. And that's just with my ADHD, Not even with my, like, I mean, my ADHD contributes to, like, my misspelling a lot, but, like, you know, I don't have dyslexia. And I know that personally, like, that I prefer dubbed anime because I don't have to pay attention to certain things. Like, I watch everything I love subbed still, but that is interesting. I will also say that, like, it's really cool that all of us are in a position right now to enjoy all of these things. There is a world in which I don't get to enjoy these things the way that Mason and Abe get to enjoy them, depending on my next year. And, you know, just appreciate what you have. Like, I've been blind a lot the last what is it, like 6 weeks, where, like, I'm just not allowed to wear my contacts or stuff. And it's like, it's really easy to not appreciate what you have, and you should appreciate it. So, if you want to join the conversation, head on over to the Patreon Discord. That's patrons of $5 or more, or the public Discord. We got some people going on there talking about Pokemon. If you also, dude, our YouTube comments, the last episode, did you guys see this? They're like, yo, let's go, fam. Abe is great. Mason's great. Spencer's great. Everybody's great. They've been talking about how great we are. You guys should go look at it. It really does help the show. We really appreciate it. You can also check us out at CCMTG on Twitter. But like, subscribe, review, and comment. Those are the best ways to support the show. Abe, where can people find you?
You can find me on twitter.com/morenothings. Go there, follow me, get my thoughts. How about you, Spencer?
Yeah, so we took the week off of Need to Nerd this week, but yeah, we have a special announcement this week that we will be recording. We have it set for this YouTube channel for me and Nat to be doing Constructed Clash every week again. It's on the calendar, and we won't miss again. So, Mason.
You can find me over on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can find me on commentary this weekend of the NRG series, where I'll be commentating the Modern event. You can reach out to me for coaching at that same Twitter account or at email masoneclark@gmail.com. Put coaching in the description so that I don't think you're spam.
What did we learn this week on the show? Oh man, this is hard. This episode was so fun. I'm really excited to hear the edit. But I learned that none of us appreciate Amalia Combo as much as it probably deserves.
Oh, that's like I've been playing.
Well, you know what? You should have said something. Yeah. Spencer said he learned this thing. I already love this thing. Mason, go ahead.
I think it's just. I think the conversation went. I don't know. I feel like it went places. But like my big thing is like I need to be maybe a bit more precise when I'm like saying like a thing about a deck positionally. Like it is this moment in time. It is not overall. Like, you know, it is like now I'm saying something. Not like, and I think something is generally true versus like a moment in time true. Hey, what about you?
I learned I'm the only one who has a true working definition of agency. And with that,
oh my god,
send us home.
You can't say that. Thank you everybody so much for listening. We appreciate everything that everybody does. Make sure that you leave a hate comment in the show notes for Abe for the like just massive like I love you, man. Please don't leave a hate comment for Abe. We'll see you all next week with another episode of CCMTG.